we're good.
Hi, back again with the Dick and Mike Show. We had a topic on the last show, accommodating tragedy, which we're not finished talking about yet.
Yeah.
And during the break, and I hope not too early before we started, before we came live, we were talking. But there was a period of time when I lived in Singapore, and they had an approach to, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, to controlling the drugs input and coming into Singapore. And they figured that was the year of the hippie. The long hair, the beads, and the braids, and all the kind of stuff. So any man that came into Singapore during that time when they brought the law in, I forget exactly when, if you had hair longer than your collar, they cut it off in the airport.
Can you imagine that?
You had a haircut in the airport, or you got back on the next plane back home. That was it.
That was profiling.
Definitely profiling. And they didn't care.
Oh, yeah.
And you could scream, holler, jump, and shout. And we were all told when we were heading for Singapore, because we used to live there, that you make sure you have a haircut before you go to Singapore.
Or you'll get one.
Or you'll get one in the airport, and they don't care what it looks like. They just want it off your collar. And their thought processes were, if we can stop you from being a hippie, you'll stop doing drugs.
Okay.
And they profiled the heck out of people. And if you were walking down the street with long hair and managed to get by, they would cut it. They would arrest you, take you to the police station, and cut your hair. And they did that for years. Now, I don't know whether that's still, I don't think it's still going on.
Did it have any impact? I mean,
well,
along with other things.
They said it did. It didn't stop us because we were doing what we had to do with short hair.
Right.
So it really didn't stop us. But what I'm getting at is that there was direct consequences for trying to present an image of someone who didn't fit in.
Right.
And the hippies over there, you didn't fit in. The Singapore culture was very strict, very regimented, very controlled, very nice place to live.
Mm-hmm.
I lived there. My children went to school there. We stayed there for almost 4 years. Never had a problem. Never had an issue. And like you were saying, with people that go there, if you got busted on the street doing something wrong, you were arrested right then. And they had public caning. They still have public caning, I think.
Well, there's a famous story years back about a young man who got caught. I don't know, bending car antennas or,
Yeah.
you know, and he was sentenced to caning. And for months, this country talked about, you know, is that barbaric? What's the purpose? How far behind are they in the times? And I remember listening to a Chicago radio station where a fella called in and said, wait a minute, before you give these people a lecture on how to run their culture, he said, I go there several times a year. He was in the import-export business. And he said, let me tell you what it's like over there. And he went on, like you, to say that it wasn't perfect, but the point was, he said, you can walk down the street at night with a tux on and $20 bills hanging out of your pocket. Nobody's gonna bother you. He talked about one time where he was over there on a trip, and he heard some ruckus and noise down on the street below his hotel room. So he came down in the morning to have breakfast, and he asked the lady if she knew what all the ruckus was about. And she said very nonchalantly while he was pouring her coffee, or she was pouring his coffee, well, they found a man with drugs on him last night, and they shot him on the street. All right?
Yeah.
So you got to think they weren't going to build a culture on accommodating tragedy. They were going to stop it, harsh as it was. Who cares more about their people, their children? Do we care a lot about our children if we let them do things that are self-destructive, get in real bad situations, but we care enough about them to try to help them out of it? Or would we care more if we did everything we could to see that they didn't get in those situations?
Well, they have I talk about it now and then with people that have traveled a little bit, or like you have been around, but they have the Chinese over there at the time, and I hope I'm right. If I'm wrong, somebody please stop in and let me know, or email us. But I was explained by Chinese families that when the children are born, they're pretty much spoiled rotten until they're 5 years old. At 5 years old, their whole world comes apart because they then are taught this is how you really have to live. You've had fun for 5 years. You got away with everything. You enjoyed the first 5 years of your life as a kid. Nothing, no consequences. You had a lot of fun. It stops now. and they stop it at 5 years old, and they then are taught to fit into society the way they're supposed to. That's the only place I've ever heard that happen.
Yeah.
We don't do that. I mean, we couldn't do that. You couldn't do that here. I mean,
I heard a young girl say that what we do in this country is, she was bemoaning the fact that it was hard to find a good husband. And she says, what we teach in this country with the guys is they drink beer and play softball till they're 35. Then they pull a rug out from under them and teach them to grow up. Not 5 years old, but 35 years old. But so culture's a lot of how this works and where it comes down.
And I must admit, and I'm not anywhere advocating that I would prefer to live there, because I had a good time there. I enjoyed that. I love the United States. I love the way we live here. I love the freedoms we have. But freedoms aren't free. You have to work for them. You have to earn them. You have to enjoy them and have respect. And that was part of what we were talking about on our show, was respect for the country, for ourselves, for our self-worth, our self-pride. If you don't respect yourself, I don't know how you're going to respect anybody else. If you don't have value on yourself, like we talked about our name on the last couple shows ago.
I was just thinking about that.
We talked about our name. My name has value. I know there was a Michael Siver that immigrated from Europe to New York and to Michigan. He's my great-great-great-grandfather, and I've been to his tombstone. I know it's a real Michael Siver. I'm proud of that. Mm-hmm. He was a founder of part of Southwest Michigan. He was prominent here years ago. He used to own a lot of the coast on Lake Michigan. So he was real prominent. I'm proud of that name. I treated it like crap for many, many years.
Right.
But I learned that there's value in your name. You look after yourself, and then everybody else will look after you. Well,
and you can extend that to the country as a whole. You talked about what do people think or when they hear your name or whatever. And there was a line I heard once that during World War II, the only soldiers that the locals didn't run from were the British and the Americans, because the Russians, the Italians, the Germans, they all afraid of them and they would treat them badly.
Right.
So there's a persona that goes ahead of them that you can be proud of. But again, the issue of accommodating tragedy or preventing it on a small scale or a large scale. I heard a coach one time give a presentation, and he made a sporting analogy to life. And he drew the analogy of, say you have a young man that you want to see play basketball because you want to go to the games and everything, but he doesn't want to go to the practices, and you don't want to make him go to the practices because you heard they're pretty harsh, and they're really hard, and the coach yells at them, and they got to run. And then maybe he didn't want to do it, but he's on the team. So what happens, of course, is the first time he gets in the game, everything is coming apart. You haven't taught him anything that works. You haven't given him, as harsh as it is, what he needs to survive, let alone succeed. Just the basic foundation. And he went on to continue the analogy. And then he said, but then comes the point where the young man turns and looks at you and looks at the coach. The crowd's booing him and everything's going wrong and he feels terrible and he's got tears in his eyes. And the tears are begging you, take me out of the game. And that's when you give them the hard news. You're not coming out. And the analogy was to life. Yeah. And if you didn't give them that to start with, you've set them up for failure. You can be their buddy, you can be nice to them. Some of it's harsh. But he encouraged parents to take the attitude that give them what they need. You have to raise them with the reality that they're going out into the world. It's not a possibility, it's a probability.
Yeah.
If they love you afterwards and they come back for Thanksgiving and you get along, that's icing on the cake. But your primary job is to recognize they're going out into the world, and you have to give them what they need.
And we get that, and we go back to the counseling practice that I do with the clients we get. They come into, and we do quite an extensive interview process and evaluation process to see what they're lacking or what their needs might be throughout the program, besides the fundamentals of what they're here for. Mm-hmm. If it's substance abuse, that's fine, we can deal with that. But through the evaluation process, we might find they need some other kind of service, an extended part of life skills. Well, we find it was surprising how much they don't know about just basic self-respect, self-worth, working with their partner in their family or their or their home with if they're still living at home with their mom and dad. Just because they're an adult, they're living in somebody else's home. It's like they don't care. It's like, you're my mom and dad, you'll do whatever I want. And there's no accountability.
Yeah. And you know, something interesting, I made this remark when I first heard, they call it Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that type of thing.
Right.
But just changes in the act and that type of thing. And again, accommodating tragedy, instead of moving to where we've got young people that are equipped to go out and survive, what we did was we set up that you can have your kids on their health plan till they're 26. And I made the remark, gee, that's a new term, 26-year-old kids. Where does it stop?
Well, we're just trying, I think they're buying votes. I mean, that's
Right.
a whole different program.
But as a culture, that's
Yeah.
now in our lexicon.
Yeah.
26-year-old kids, and to me, that's an oxymoron. Those are indirect,
Well,
opposite.
they pick the age that suits them, because I remember when we were young, it was 21. Everything was 21, 21, 21, 21, before you had almost any rights at all.
Right.
Then they went down to 18. Now it's 26. They pick the age to suit them, to meet their needs, to service a community that needs to be accommodated.
Right.
Because we have to support them. We have to help them. It's like when I was young, I remember unemployment benefits.
Mm-hmm.
You only got unemployment benefits for so long, and that was related to how many years you worked.
Mm-hmm.
Then it stopped. And you have to go find a job.
Right.
Or get nothing.
Right.
That's gone.
Well, and you can, your definition of a tragedy can vary. It's a tragedy that we have young people coming out of college so far in debt. I mean, they're at least making a
Yeah.
small house payment or a decent car payment for the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
That's a tragedy. So what do? We accommodate a 20-year payment instead of working at the fact that how are these kids coming out so far in debt. You look at unwed mothers in multiple births, and everybody says, well, if you want to talk about that, you're insensitive and cruel and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But it's a tragedy. But what we've done is, instead of saying, look, if you are widowed, if your husband, or if you're in a real difficult situation, we'll help you. But instead of saying, look, if you're going to have a child and you're all healthy, and you better have a plan. You and somebody better be able to take care of it, or your parents said they'd help you,
Yeah.
or you can do it, but we're not going to pick it up. So what we're doing is accommodating this tragedy of you having a child without thinking about it, no harsh consequences. Then you find out that there are certain benefits that you can have another one. I know a lady that worked in an emergency ward in a major hospital. And she talked about the young girls that would come in at 17 or whatever, complaining of stomach pains and that type of thing. And as part of it, they would give them a pregnancy test. Before they gave x-rays and things, it's something you'd want to know. And the young girls would be disappointed that they weren't pregnant because their parents had told them at 18, I don't get anything more for you, so you're leaving.
Yep.
So what they would do is start their own plan, so to speak.
Yep.
And when you talk about that, you're very condemning, you're profiling, you're whatever. It's a fact. This is a tragedy in a lot of circumstances, and what we do is accommodate it instead of going back and saying, time out. If you're going to have a child, you better have a plan.
Well, what's even more frightening than that for me, thinking about it, is where does it come to the point where a young girl will think, that's my only option?
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's a tragedy. If that's what they do.
It's a huge tragedy,
Yeah.
when if that's their only way to make money,
Right.
is to have children.
Or have a, yeah.
There's a whole big piece missing out of that whole picture.
Right.
Of that whole puzzle. There's a whole huge amount missing. We've got to figure out, and I hope we get some people come on board here and help us talk about this. But with the accommodating all the tragedies that, and it's so wide, it's so variety. I mean, you talk about college payments plans. I mean, that's almost their whole life.
Yeah.
You're going to be paying back to going to 4 years of school. And not many of them, and that's statistically been proven, earn enough money to pay that back. It takes forever.
Because the
So-
real good jobs are in education. And money, that's where the money's at.
And educating
So you got to
them.
borrow money to pay for that.
Yeah. And then you can apply to get it forgiven at some point. Well, then where's the taxpayer paid for your education that you don't have to pay them back? So we're accommodating you again. When does accommodation start to become a behavior with people? When
Rewarding bad behavior.
We're
right?
starting to reward bad behavior.
Well, we started in the 60s by some token.
Yeah.
People started with the Great Society, that there'd be no hole in the ground, there'd always be a net over it, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So you talk about rewarding bad behavior, but when this whole thing started, call them liberals, whoever, but progressives, the people that were pushing this, the phrase I heard over and over again, Mike, was certainly a country as rich as we are can afford to take care of those who have lost in life's lottery or something like that. And you see it all the time. And some people remark that not only is it unfair, but maybe at $18 trillion in debt, we can't afford this anymore. And everybody says that's the defense budget, but it's not. It's a lot of other things too.
Well, we talk a lot with some other people about the wages and the parity, what's going on, and when you get down to socialism, and it's off the topic here a little bit, but it's still accommodating. When the government starts to accommodate everybody, then they don't pay for anything. They live for free. Where does it stop? And we talk about the corporations are the ones who, whether we like the executives earning $1 million a year or whatever, they're the ones that create the new jobs and the new companies and the new plants that start out there. There's never, that I know of, been a group of laborers, workers, start a company. They can't afford to.
Right.
And I understand that.
Right.
So why are we beating up the companies?
Right.
Why are we beating up on the managers and the directors? Maybe there's a little too much money up there, but still.
And that can be that can be addressed other ways.
It can be.
The board should say, hey, hold on here, that type of thing.
And that's the board.
That's right.
We keep beating up all these people that are creating jobs for the ones that are complaining.
One of the things I find fascinating, when I ran for Congress years ago and they were talking about the tax code, and one of the things I said, rather flippantly, but I was serious because I was sure of it, so I just flipped it out. I said, I wouldn't have a corporate tax at all. I would never tax one of these big corporations. And of course, people went ballistic. And one of the fellows I was talking to was in organized labor. And I said, let me ask you this. When you strike or you bargain or whatever, your whole premise is that corporation is just a legal entity, that communally you've all contributed to its profits. And if it's doing well, you should have a piece of it, correct? And he goes, yeah. So you believe that's rightfully your money in the treasury to some degree? I said, yeah. Why then are you happy when it's sent off to Washington? Why don't you see that you're all being taxed? You never got that. So the corporation is sort of becoming a collection point for the government. They hold on to the money they didn't give you and send it to Washington. You're all losing. You're all being taxed. And he just stared at me. Totally foreign concept.
Yeah.
And I said, there's less sympathy for large corporations. Numerically, there are less of them than the total population. So that's why this gets done. So everybody found a real neat little way to say, well, again, accommodating, you call accommodating tragedy, but people get all angry if we're paying taxes and everything. We've got, by the IRS's own admission, 47% of the population that is in the no tax, at least federal tax due category. And something Romney mentioned, and it just killed him. It's a fact. Our own government acknowledges it. So what we've done is accommodate all these people that say, I'm too poor to pay taxes, and said, okay, what we'll do is we'll get the other guys. We'll get the rich guys, the middle class.
Yep.
So we've accommodated you, and it's turned into a mess because you do drive on the roads. You do benefit from student loans. You do benefit from the Institutes of Health Research for healthy. I mean, you do live in this country. You're protected by the military. You should pay something. But we have gone by this, whereas a country as rich as ours should be able, we can't do it anymore. We're busted. We're busted a long time ago.
Yeah.
When you're $18 trillion in debt, you can't use the phrase a country as rich as ours anymore.
We're rich in debt,
Yeah.
is what we are. But
And we're rich in trouble too, because we've accommodated everybody's problems instead of trying to work to correct them.
And I'm wondering how this drug testing for welfare is going to go. Seems to be taking off steam. Seems to be picking up speed in a lot of different states. Whereas if you want to get free benefits.
Right.
We want to prove that you're not using it on drugs.
Right.
And I think that's a great idea.
Well, we have a precedent for it. You know, food stamps and things aren't used for certain categories.
Yeah.
Dog food, liquor, cigarettes. So, I mean, there's precedent for controlling how you spend it if we're giving it to you.
But you can also, there's ways to manipulate the system.
Oh, it's done.
And it's done all the time. You know it and I know it.
Sure.
And I think it's a beginning to start holding people accountable that we don't hold. We don't accommodate them for giving them free money. There's no consequences. There's no standard held.
I've always called it political hush money, because if you took these people's money away, they'd have to have a source of income.
Yep.
And a source of income would be employment. And then they'd be dramatically aware that we have dealt away a lot of jobs overseas to other places. That's why we give you this hush money, so you don't realize there isn't a good job out for you somewhere.
So as long as you're earning money, you'll be quiet.
Yeah.
You just do your stuff, go to work, come home. You don't even go to work. You just get up in the morning, go in the living room, stay there all day, and then go back to bed.
And most people want to work.
Yeah.
Just like they want to succeed in athletics or anything else. They want some benchmark. It's a class or social or economic war that's also been perpetrated. I've often said one of the biggest myths that is perpetrated, particularly by political people who want to garner favor with the middle and underclass, is that rich people don't care about them. There's probably no one who has a more vested interest in a healthy middle class than the wealthy.
Yeah. That's
where they make their money. They want you and I to have disposable income so we can go out to eat. We can buy that second car. We can take a vacation up north. That's where they make their money. They have no interest in choking us all to death. But they're at war with us, so that's why they have to take certain actions, and that's why they lobby, and that's why they do this and that.
And it's like a third party being a catalyst to keep the two fighting at each other all the time, and that third party is the government.
Or the political class.
The political class of people, yeah.
That's what they do.
Because that's a new class.
Yep.
And it's going to be shown that very soon.
They have a vested interest in it.
They have a very vested interest in doing it. But when you get to the point of when do they realize that this is what's happened? Mm-hmm. How do we educate the people? Because there's so much money out there buying the news, buying the propaganda, if you want to call it propaganda, that you can be accommodated for your lifestyle if you do this or do that, or don't do this and don't do that. And how many times, I've only heard you say it twice, I think. I don't know if I've heard it outside of Romney before, that they talk about the population that are not paying taxes. That's never talked about.
Right.
And it needs to be.
Right.
There needs to be some kind of accommodation for the people who do pay taxes. And how do you have to earn your volunteer time? Do you have to go and earn money? Do so much to get this free money? There's no request. There's no standard. You just get your check. It even goes direct deposit into your bank.
Sure.
You don't even have to go, like when my mom was on welfare, we used to have to get in the car once a month, go to this place, wherever it was. They would open the trunk up and they'd fill it full of food and stuff. How many kids? We had a lot of kids. And then we'd go home.
To point out, your family was built and your father disappeared.
Yeah.
You weren't mooching the system.
No, we had.
You were the widows and orphans things that I agree.
Yeah.
We can take care of. Things happen, but you were in a pretty tough situation as a family. I recall it wasn't today's playing the system, so to speak.
But even then, we had to go and get it.
Right.
And then the rent for the house, the agency, whoever it was, paid that directly to the landowner, to the house owner. We didn't see that cash. We didn't see cash.
You all had part-time jobs too. You kids all worked at different places, farms and stores and things too.
Well, we had a little pocket money.
Yeah.
But that's all we could get was a little pocket money. Yeah. And that was okay with us. It was the way we knew when we got older we could get jobs, this would stop.
Right.
And it did. It happened like that.
Right.
We all got jobs. We all grew up. We went to work, and then the welfare stopped, and Mom got a job.
And again, I don't think anybody objects to people who are caught in a terrible situation or whatever to helping them. But it's become a career path for some. And people say, oh, well, that's not true, and you're exploiting it, and you're extrapolating the figures larger than they are. Well, it is. It's a big issue.
Yeah.
And the damage that's done, go on to these same environments, households, neighborhoods, whatever you want, and look at the crime rates. Look at the teachers today that talk about nobody comes to parent-teacher conferences, or the mother, the one child, and the father that comes all have different names.
Yep.
It's tough. There is a price to pay for this.
But how do we get this to stop accommodating the people who don't earn their money, who don't produce, or the ones who violate the laws, which I deal with a lot. You used to deal with as a policeman, as a state trooper. How do we change the accommodation attitude of the people who make the decisions, of the people who say you're guilty or not guilty, you're going to get this or you're going to get that? I'm a supporter of interventions, don't get me wrong. In a lot of cases they work, in some cases, when you get through a group of clients over a year's time, they're only there to do their time. And the ones who are really involved, they ask the questions, they want to know what's going on. They won't be accommodated any longer when this class is done, because they're not going to want to come back.
Right.
The other ones don't care. And they find the money somewhere to pay for these classes. They find the money to pay their fines. They find the money to pay their probation officers on their monthly visits. So where's that money coming from? Are we paying our taxes, giving them the money to pay their fines? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the coach's analogy of, the cruelest thing we can do is not tell somebody the rules of the game and then also tell them they're not coming out.
Yeah.
So we've cast these people, out to sea, so to speak, and wherever they're getting money and doing things, it's because they have to.
Yeah.
They haven't been afforded a plan. They haven't been. In our generation, half of the baby boom generation, I say, my personal theory, has done a lot of damage, because a lot of things that used to work, they mocked their folks and how conservative they were as the unwashed masses.
Right.
Mom and dad didn't have a college degree. Mom stayed home, that type of thing. Didn't want to be like them. They gave them everything. They put them through school at much different rates. They mocked a lot of the conservatism, the going to church every Sunday, church attendance is down. And so a lot of that came down to shuffling it away. And we know that if we could get this back, we'd probably benefit from it as a culture. But we got all these legal beagles that say the instrumentalities of putting that back in our culture are illegal. You can't have those things in school. You can't do this here. You can't do that. But we've got about 30, 40 seconds here left.
Well, part of also what we're doing is, in part of our counseling now, we're bringing into a financial program where we're going to spend a couple of weeks, we do it each week now, or each class now, on teaching them how to budget,
Right.
how to spend their money, how to not spend their money, how to save their money, and how to prepare for the future, because they're not prepared at all.
Yeah.
And that's
Some of the simple rules of the game.
yeah. And where did all that go?
Right.
I know I was taught that when I was a kid,
Right.
and my mom said, save this, save that, and spend that, but don't spend that.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
you learned, and
Yeah.
that's not taught anymore. I don't understand why it stopped. Maybe it's just I'm old school, and I thought it should be an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Well, good topic. Talked about a lot of different places for sure, not only here, but thank you again. We'll talk about some other things, and we'll see you soon.
Very much, Dick.
Yep.
It's been a pleasure being on the show with you.
Enjoy it.
Good night, Dick.
Yep. Good night, Chet. Oh, excuse me.